There are places in America where the darkness doesn't hide, it lingers. Back roads no one dares to travel twice, old buildings that whisper when the wind dies down, and woods where silence feels heavier than sound. These are the corners of reality where logic frays and something older begins to speak. You've heard the stories, haven't you? Creatures with eyes that glow through the fog, footsteps on the second floor when you live alone, voices in dreams that don't belong to you. What if they weren't just stories? There's a reason these encounters are whispered instead of shouted, a reason people hesitate before telling you what they saw. Because once you hear it, once you believe it, it follows you. Not like a memory, but like a shadow that starts showing up in places it didn't belong before. These are stories told with a trembling voice, not to entertain, but to warn. And tonight, we're going to walk through them together. From the infamous Beast of Bray, road stalking the misty roads of Wisconsin, to a man who made a peace offering of fried chicken to something that wasn't human. These encounters will challenge everything you think you know about monsters. Not all of them growl, not all of them chase. Some simply wait, watching, patient, smiling with eyes that aren't eyes. And what about the ones that knock? The ones that slip through cracks in your home when you're too tired to care. The long man has no face, but he remembers yours. Once you've seen him, you're part of something. A list, a cycle, a haunting that doesn't end when the story does. You'll check the corners of your room differently after this one, but not every terror comes from creatures with claws. Some come from above, vast red lights blinking over quiet fields. No sound, no answers, just a feeling that something knows you're looking up and looking back. Others creep into your home through dreams, shared visions, impossible symbols, and a tone that hums beneath reality, waiting to pull you under. Then there are the places, the cursed buildings, the strange neighbors, the funeral homes with no funerals, where dragging sounds echo at night and graves appear and disappear like smoke. What's buried there isn't resting, and those who watch too closely often find themselves part of the next delivery. This isn't just a collection of scary stories, it's a map of where the veil thins, a reminder that the unexplained doesn't ask for permission before stepping into your life. So lock your doors, keep the lights on, and listen closely, because the moment you hit play, something else starts listening too. The fog hung thick over Bray Road that night, clinging to the pavement like a second skin. The diner worker, exhausted after a long shift, drove slowly through the misty Wisconsin darkness, her headlights barely cutting through the dense air. Country roads like this one had always felt eerie, but tonight something felt unusually oppressive. Her fingers gripped the wheel tighter with each mile. She'd heard the stories, whispers of something unnatural prowling the area, but never gave them much thought. The radio hummed softly, a familiar distraction in an unfamiliar mood. Then, out of nowhere, a shape darted across the road. She slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the slick asphalt. A raccoon, just a raccoon. Her breath caught in her throat, and she laughed nervously at herself. The animal lay still, clearly struck. She pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath her tires as she stepped out into the thick fog. The cold air bit at her skin, and the silence was deafening. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally as she approached the animal. Kneeling beside the limp form, she whispered an apology under her breath. But then a sound, low, guttural, cut through the silence behind her. She turned slowly, pulse racing. Standing at the edge of the road, barely visible through the mist, was a towering figure. At first, she thought it might be a man, but its proportions were all wrong. It stood on two legs, tall and muscular, with hunched shoulders and elongated arms. The yellow eyes locked onto hers, glowing like twin coals. Its snout was wolf-like, but it bore the intelligence and posture of something far more terrifying. A single step forward made her stumble backward. The road felt a mile wide now, the car impossibly far away. Heart pounding in her ears, she bolted toward her vehicle, keys already in hand. Behind her, she heard the creature's claws scrape against the road as it gave chase. She barely made it into the car, slamming the door shut just as something heavy collided with the trunk. The vehicle rocked, her scream lost in the roar of the engine. She didn't look back, just slammed her foot down and tore off into the night. The rearview mirror showed nothing, but she could feel it still watching. For several miles she kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see it beside the car, keeping pace. But nothing came. The road twisted and turned, but the fog never lifted, as if trying to trap her in that moment. Her knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. The silence inside the car was overwhelming, broken only by her ragged breathing. Then a sudden thump from the roof made her cry out again. She didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Eventually, the lights of Elkhorn came into view, and she didn't slow down until she was safely in her driveway. She locked the car, double-checked her front door, and sat in the kitchen with the lights on until dawn. Sleep never came, only the memory of those glowing eyes. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a large dog or a trick of the fog. But deep down, she knew better. The thing she saw was real, and it was watching. She returned to work the next day, quieter, pale and distracted. Her co-workers noticed the change. When they asked, she hesitated, then shared a watered-down version of what had happened. They laughed nervously, throwing out old local legends, but one older server fell silent. He'd heard similar stories, people seeing things out there, but none had ever spoken so clearly about it. He warned her not to go back that way again. That night, curiosity got the better of her. She searched online for Bray Road creature and was stunned by how many stories matched her experience. Descriptions of a bipedal, wolf-like being, encounters with glowing eyes, pursuits just like hers. This wasn't just folklore, it had a name, the Beast of Bray Road, and she had met it face to face. In the days that followed, she developed a habit of checking every shadow, every rustle of wind. Her dreams were filled with fog, glowing eyes, and that guttural growl. She tried to shake it, to ground herself in the rational world, but something had changed. Something had followed her home. It lingered at the edge of her thoughts, a presence, just out of reach. Animals in the neighborhood began acting strangely, barking into the night, refusing to go outside after dusk. She told herself it was coincidence. But then, one night, she woke to the sound of scratching at her back door. 3 long, deliberate scrapes. She didn't dare move. The next morning, claw marks lined the wood, deep, real. She reported it, but the police chalked it up to a raccoon, or maybe a bear. They didn't believe her, how could they? But the fear was growing, clawing at her sanity. She kept her windows closed, bought stronger locks, and started carrying a flashlight everywhere. But what protection could a flashlight offer against something that shouldn't exist? She stopped driving that road, took the longer route even when it meant hours lost. Still, every time she closed her eyes, the fog returned. The eyes returned. It wasn't just a sighting, it was an awakening. Something out there had seen her, chosen her, and it wasn't done. Months passed, but the feeling never left. She could sense it, lurking in the woods when she walked outside, staring from dark corners. It never spoke, never returned in daylight, but she knew it was there, watching, waiting. In the quietest moments, she could still hear it, that low growl vibrating in her bones, that primal, ancient hunger. She had looked into the eyes of something beyond explanation, and it had looked back. Something old, something wrong, something that now lived in her nightmares. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when the 2 factory workers finished their shifts and headed to their usual spot. It was a dirt pull-off by the woods, behind a rural KFC on the outskirts of town. They often sat there to unwind, sharing stories, laughter, and whatever food they could scrounge together. That night, it was a bucket of fried chicken, still hot, the scent thick in the humid air. The parking lot was empty, the restaurant closed, and only the distant chirp of insects filled the silence. They sat on the hood of the car, legs dangling, grease-stained napkins in hand. But soon the woods behind them grew unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. The first to notice it was Jared. Mid-sentence, his voice faltered and his eyes narrowed toward the tree line. His friend, Marcus, followed his gaze, expecting to see a deer or maybe a stray dog. Instead, there stood a tall, shadowed figure just beyond the first line of trees. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't move at all. It simply watched. Eyes faintly catching the light from the car's headlights, glowing yellow like twin embers in the dusk. Neither man spoke for a long moment. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. Slowly the figure stepped forward, and moonlight broke through enough to reveal what they were facing. Towering, bipedal, and unmistakably beast-like, the creature's frame resembled a wolf, but not one of nature. Its fur was dark, thick, matted, and its limbs were muscular yet oddly human. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Jared dropped his chicken. But instead of charging, the beast halted a few feet away, head tilted slightly. It didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. It just stood there, waiting. In an act that neither of them could explain, Jared picked up a drumstick and slowly held it out. His hand trembled, extended toward the creature that could end them in a blink. Marcus hissed for him to stop, but it was too late. The beast stepped forward, and with surprising gentleness, reached out with clawed fingers. It took the drumstick delicately, as if aware of its own power. Then, still watching them, it crouched and began to eat. The two men stood frozen, watching something no one would ever believe. The creature chewed slowly, its glowing eyes never leaving theirs. When it finished, it stood tall again and looked toward the woods. With one last glance, it turned and disappeared into the darkness without a sound. The men didn't move for several minutes, hearts hammering in their chests. Finally, Jared whispered, "Did that just happen?" Marcus nodded, his voice hoarse. "I think we just made peace. With something. Not of this world." The next day, the memory didn't fade. It consumed their thoughts, an impossible moment lodged in the real world. Jared, always the skeptic, now questioned everything. Marcus, more spiritual, believed it was a test or a gift. That night, they returned with more food. This time, fried chicken, cornbread, and a small bottle of honey. They waited under the same tree line, surrounded by a silence that was no longer hostile. The air carried expectation. Just before midnight, the forest shifted. A shape emerged once more, slower this time. The creature stopped at the edge again, as if observing their intent. Jared placed the food on a flat rock and stepped back. The beast approached, took the offerings, and retreated. No sound, no threat, only recognition. Respect, perhaps, as though some ancient agreement had been honored. They watched until the darkness swallowed it again. This continued for 3 nights. The creature never came closer, never touched them. Again, it simply accepted what was given and vanished. On the 4th night, they left food and waited longer, but nothing appeared. The forest remained silent, unmoving. The food was untouched by morning. Whatever bond had formed, it had ended, as quietly as it began. And yet the feeling of awe and mystery lingered like the smell of smoke after a fire. They told no one at first. Who would believe it? But the story clawed at them, begging to be shared. Eventually, they confided in a co-worker who'd grown up near Bray Road. His face paled as they spoke. He'd heard of similar stories, offerings made to something in the woods, an unspoken agreement. Some called it a guardian, others a demon. Either way, it was never to be trifled with. Months passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. But neither Jared nor Marcus could look at the woods the same way again. They avoided that pull-off, even during daylight. They still spoke of that night in hushed tones, never fully grasping what they had experienced. It wasn't just a beast. It wasn't just hunger. There was thought behind those glowing eyes, intent. One night, Marcus dreamt of the creature sitting silently by their old meeting spot. In the dream, it looked older, more tired. Behind it, the trees wept black sap, and the sky cracked with thunder. When he woke, he found a claw mark etched into the side of his shed, too high for any known animal. The dream had followed him, or perhaps the visitor had returned. Jared too began to notice strange things, shadows moving against the wind, whispers just beyond hearing. Once, while grilling in his backyard, he found one of the same rocks they'd used by the woods placed neatly on his porch. He didn't touch it, just stared at it for a long time, then gently swept it into the forest behind his home, a silent acknowledgement. Whatever they had fed that night, it wasn't just flesh and bone, it was memory, a ritual, a link between man and myth renewed in grease-stained napkins and midnight offerings. And even now, when the wind blows just right, the scent of fried chicken wafts through the trees like a summoning. The forest remembers. Neither man regrets what they did, but both agree they would never do it again. The peace was not meant to be broken twice. Some things are better left as a mystery. Some beings better left full and far away. Bray Road still stretches under the fog, and now it watches too. The first time he saw it, he thought it was a dream. A tall, pale figure standing at the edge of his bedroom door, unmoving, watching. The man had just moved into his late aunt's house, an old two-story Victorian in a quiet neighborhood. It creaked at night, but he chalked it up to age. Yet something about that figure in the hallway chilled him beyond logic. It wore a tattered black suit, the fabric barely hanging to its bone-thin frame. Its limbs were unnaturally long, fingers like wires, and its face was a blank smear of pallid flesh. By the time he fully woke, it was gone. He convinced himself it was sleep paralysis or stress from the move. Boxes still lined the walls, dust coated the corners, and the house felt unfamiliar. But that unease didn't fade. Days passed, and the creaking began to follow a pattern. Upstairs steps when no one was there, tapping sounds from the attic at the same time each night. Then came the knocking. Always 3 knocks, always from the same place. His bedroom window, on the 2nd floor, but there was no ledge, no tree nearby. No way for anyone to reach it. One night, curious and defiant, he stood by the window and waited. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the knocks came, slow, deliberate, each one deeper than the last. Heart hammering, he flung the curtains aside, expecting nothing. But there it was, just inches beyond the glass. The long man, bent forward, too tall for the window, with its long arms hanging low. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared through that featureless face, as if memorizing him. He stumbled backward, tripping over a chair, and by the time he looked again, it was gone. From that moment on, he didn't sleep without the lights on. He began locking every door, every window, even sealing off the attic. But still, the sounds came. The knocking grew louder. Once he found muddy footprints inside the hall, though all the doors were bolted shut. He washed them away, but they returned the next night, leading from the window to the stairs. The long man, it seemed, didn't care about locks. It was already inside. He installed cameras, motion sensors, alarms. Nothing ever triggered them. Yet he kept waking up with his sheets pulled off, his closet door wide open. Sometimes he'd find the hallway light flickering, as if someone had passed by. A cold draft would move through the room, smelling faintly of mildew and old books. Each sign chipped away at his sanity. He stopped inviting people over. He stopped answering calls. The house became a prison of silence and fear. He researched everything he could: ghosts, urban legends, local hauntings. That's when he found mention of a similar figure, a tall, distorted man in old-fashioned clothes, seen peering through second-floor windows across the Midwest. No one had proof. Only drawings, whispers, and the same phrase repeated in every account: he watches but does not blink. The long man was no ghost. He was a presence, timeless and patient. One night, desperate for sleep, the man took sleeping pills. They worked. He fell into a dreamless void. But when he awoke, he was standing in the hallway staring at his own bedroom door. It was wide open. Inside, on his bed, were 3 long scratches carved into the mattress. Not deep, but precise, like a warning. He never remembered walking there. He never remembered getting out of bed. But the fear was now inside him, burrowing deep. He left the house the next day, checking into a hotel across town. The silence there felt different, clean, untainted. But as he unpacked, he noticed something odd. His suitcase had been unzipped. Inside, tucked between 2 shirts, was a piece of folded paper. He opened it slowly and his blood turned to ice. It was a charcoal sketch, his bedroom window, and behind it the face of the long man. Drawn with such accuracy, it could only have come from someone who'd seen it firsthand. He never returned to the house, not even to collect the rest of his things. He sold it within the month to a company that demolished it soon after, but the feeling didn't leave. At night, he still kept the lights on, still checked the corners, still flinched at knocks, because he knew the truth. You don't escape the long man, you just leave him behind until he decides to follow. The dreams began again after a few weeks. He'd see the house intact, even though it had been torn down. He'd walk its halls, and the air would thicken with dread. At the end of each dream, he'd turn toward the stairs, and there the long man would be, waiting. Just watching, never moving. When he woke up, his feet were always cold, always damp. One morning, he found a single black thread in his hotel bed. It smelled like the old suit. He didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? But the dreams got worse, more vivid. He'd wake up screaming, clawing at his own chest, sure that something had been pressing down on him. The weight of a presence, an entity that never left once seen, a figure that watched with eyeless patience. He began keeping journals, recording every encounter, every whisper, every new sign. The sketches grew darker, more detailed. He no longer needed reference photos, he could draw the long man from memory. The worst part? In every drawing, the long man was getting closer. What had started as a distant shape was now filling the page, closing in. Some nights he'd find his pen still in his hand, the ink running dry, pages filled with the same sentence written over and over. He knows I see him. He didn't remember writing it, didn't remember anything. But each time the fear deepened. The long man was no longer just watching. He was learning, studying, preparing. The man's final entry was brief, scrawled in haste, smeared in places. It read, "He's at the door." The journal was found in an abandoned motel room, light still on, television static humming. No sign of struggle, no blood. Just silence, and muddy footprints leading out the back door into the woods beyond. He was never seen again. It started as a quiet drive through the hills. Nothing unusual, nothing strange. A mother had just picked up her teenage daughter from a late school event in the rural outskirts. The night was crisp, the stars blurred behind a thin layer of clouds, and the headlights carved a soft path through the dark. They chatted idly, the car humming over the empty road, surrounded by forest on both sides. Then, the daughter fell silent mid-sentence, her eyes fixed ahead. "What's that?" she asked, pointing toward the ridge above them. At first, the mother saw nothing. Then red lights, huge, deep crimson orbs hovered in the sky, completely still. There were 4 of them, blinking in slow, calculated sequence, left to right, then all at once, then off entirely. The lights weren't flashing like aircraft, and there was no sound, no rumble, no wind, no hum, just silence. The mother slowed the car to a stop, rolling down the window to hear better. Nothing but the chirp of insects and the slow thud of her heartbeat in her ears. The lights reappeared, brighter now, larger, closer, suspended in the air like lanterns from some other world. They didn't move like drones. They didn't behave like helicopters or planes. They simply hovered in perfect formation above the plateau, as if observing. The daughter, unnerved but mesmerized, pulled out her phone. But the battery had died moments earlier, despite being fully charged before they left. Her mother checked her own, no signal, the screen flickering dimly. An electric tension filled the car, like static before a storm. The red glow cast eerie shadows across their dashboard, painting their faces in alien light. Neither of them spoke, too afraid of breaking whatever fragile barrier kept them safe. For 15 long minutes, they watched. The lights pulsed, sometimes vanishing, only to reappear farther down the ridge. At one point, they formed a perfect triangle in the sky. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they vanished. No acceleration, no sound, just instant darkness. The night returned to normal, as if someone had flipped a switch. The stars emerged from behind the clouds. The radio, previously full of static, came back to life with a soft pop. The daughter whispered, "Did that really happen?" And the mother could only nod. Back home, they searched online for answers, but no one had reported anything that night. No news, no social media buzz, nothing. It was as if the event had existed solely for them, witnesses to something no one else had seen. The mother regretted not trying harder to record it, but deep down she wondered if that was ever even possible. Some things don't want to be captured. Some things choose who gets to remember them. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Lights in the house would flicker at random. Electronics would drain without reason. The daughter spoke of vivid dreams, floating above the woods, unable to scream. The mother felt watched, especially at night, when the stars blinked too slowly, and the wind carried a metallic scent. They told no one, not because they were afraid of being mocked, but because the memory felt sacred, like a secret they hadn't asked for but now had to carry. One night, weeks later, the mother was alone, standing on the porch. She looked toward the same ridge, half hoping, half dreading the return, and there they were, just two this time. Red, pulsing, silent. She didn't call her daughter. She didn't reach for a phone. She simply watched. The lights hovered, flickered, and then slowly drifted out of view behind the trees. The air felt warmer afterward, charged. She went back inside, heart racing. The next morning, there were burn marks on the lawn, 2 perfect circles charred into the grass. No footprints, no explanation. She didn't report it, didn't photograph. Yet the evidence was too obvious to make sense. That's how it always seemed to work. The more visible it was, the less anyone wanted to believe it. So she stayed quiet. But the fear lingered like smoke. Her daughter changed after that. Grew quieter, more thoughtful. She started drawing the lights again and again, always red, always in 3s or 4s. One day the mother found a sketch she hadn't seen before, her daughter floating above the ridge surrounded by red orbs, her face peaceful and blank. When she asked her about it, the girl just said, "It's what they showed me." But she refused to say more. The mother began to wonder, was it an encounter or was it an invitation? Were they being studied or selected? Every so often, she'd catch her daughter staring out the window toward the ridge, waiting, listening. And sometimes, she thought she saw those lights reflected in her daughter's eyes, even when the sky was dark. The girl would smile slightly, as if hearing something her mother couldn't. Other nights the dreams returned. They were different now, less terrifying, more surreal. The mother would dream of standing in a field, the red lights above, feeling utterly calm, as if embraced by something vast and intelligent. When she woke, her skin would tingle as if sunburned. Her watch would stop for exactly 15 minutes, the same length of time the lights hovered that first night. Then came the missing time. A short trip to the store took nearly 3 hours. She swore it had been only 20 minutes. Her daughter didn't seem concerned, only said, "They brought you back." The words chilled her more than she could admit. She started keeping journals, recording every anomaly, every lost moment, every dream. The entries grew stranger. She began to feel like a passenger in her own body. Finally, she wrote a letter, one she never sent, detailing everything. She ended it with a warning. If the lights find you, don't follow, don't listen. But if you already have, it's too late. The letter was tucked away in a drawer where only her daughter could find it. Because deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Whatever the lights were, they weren't done with them. It started with a dream. A woman named Clara woke in the middle of the night, her chest tight, the room unusually silent. In the dream, she stood in her hallway, staring at an old lamp shaped like an angel. Its wings pulsed with light, expanding, outward in strange rhythms, and a low humming tone filled the air. The lamp began to grow taller, the light intensifying until it consumed everything. She awoke just before the light touched her. Shaken but dismissive, she chalked it up to stress. But over breakfast, her younger sister described the same exact dream. They laughed nervously, both confused by the eerie overlap. But as the day went on, small details emerged that made them pause. The same humming tone, the same growing lamp, even the same final moment just before the light made contact. Their parents, overhearing the conversation, paled. Quietly, their mother admitted she had the same dream 2 nights prior. Clara stared in disbelief. Was it coincidence, shared memory, or something deeper? That night, they all experienced the sound. It came just after 3 a.m., a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the house, not loud, but bone deep. It didn't come from any visible source. The windows didn't rattle, the walls didn't shake, but the air felt heavier. Clara stepped into the hallway and saw her sister already standing there, eyes wide, whispering, "It's the same sound." The hallway light flickered once and returned to normal. The hum stopped as suddenly as it began. They searched the house looking for anything that could have caused the noise, but nothing explained it. No electronics out of place, no power surges, no strange weather, just silence. The next morning, Clara's father confessed something he hadn't told them. The same dream had plagued him for weeks before theirs. And worse, he believed he saw the lamp once in real life years ago in his childhood home. A vision he'd locked away, now returning through his children. The family grew more anxious as the days passed. Every night someone heard something. New, faint whispers in corners of rooms, static hissing from unplugged devices, soft thumps behind walls. The dreams returned, evolving. The lamp now opened like a blooming flower, revealing faces inside, calm, ancient, and watching. Clara began sketching them in a notebook, and to her horror, her sister matched them perfectly without ever seeing hers. The faces were identical, down to the smallest wrinkle. They began to sleep with the lights on. The dreams didn't stop. Clara's mother, once skeptical, became withdrawn. She claimed the humming was following her even during the day. She'd hear it in the store, at work, under conversations, a low thrum just beneath the noise of life. Clara's father suggested seeing a doctor, but something told them this was not a matter of health. It was presence. Something was here. And it knew them all. One morning, Clara found her sketchbook open on the kitchen table. Pages she hadn't drawn yet were filled in with more faces, more symbols, some glowing faintly despite being done in pencil. Her sister swore she hadn't touched it. Their mother whispered that it had always been there even before they moved in, that the dreams were a message, not a warning. She spoke in riddles now, repeating the same phrase. "It comes in waves, and we are the shore." That night the tone came again, but this time layered with a second sound, a whisper beneath the hum, a voice they couldn't quite understand, speaking a language they didn't know. But every time Clara focused on it, she felt a pressure in her skull. Not pain, just presence, as if something was trying to come through. Her sister reported seeing the angel lamp in the mirror, behind her reflection, only for a second, but long enough to make her scream. They placed salt under the doors, burned sage, lit candles, anything to break the cycle. But nothing worked. The dreams evolved further. Clara found herself floating in space, the angel lamp orbiting her like a satellite. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't safe either. The light it gave off now pulsed like a heartbeat, and in the silence between pulses she heard her name whispered in dozens of voices, some her own. One day the hum came during daylight. The house filled with that low vibration, rattling glasses and making the dog whimper. The lights dimmed, every mirror fogged over. On each one, a handprint appeared, small, childlike, pressed from the inside. Clara grabbed her phone to record, but the screen refused to light up. All they could do was sit and listen, waiting for the sound to stop. When it did, the mirrors were clean again. The fear was not. The family tried to leave, packed a weekend bag and drove an hour out of town. The first night in the hotel, they slept soundly. No dreams, no humming. But in the morning, they awoke to find the same angel lamp on the nightstand glowing faintly. The hotel staff swore it wasn't theirs. They returned home. It was waiting for them there too, on the mantel, on the kitchen counter, in the garage, as if multiplying, watching. Clara began drawing symbols compulsively, spirals, eyes, circles with slashes. Her fingers bled from sketching, but she couldn't stop. Her sister stopped speaking entirely. Their father spent hours in the basement, scribbling equations and muttering about light frequencies. Their mother sat by the window watching the sky. She said the dreams weren't dreams anymore. They were warnings or preparations. On the final night, they all dreamed the same dream, again. But this time they stood together. Not in the house, not on earth. A place of stars and darkness and white marble ground. The angel lamp hovered above them, now massive and pulsing. The voice spoke clearly at last. "You are remembered. You are marked." When they awoke, they all had the same mark burned lightly into their skin, a spiral over the heart. He moved into the house next to the old funeral home in late autumn, expecting quiet nights and privacy. The building had sat empty for years, its windows boarded, its sign faded, but now it had reopened under mysterious new ownership. No advertisements, no obituary listings, no services anyone could recall attending. Yet each night around 2 a.m., lights flickered inside. A van would arrive, headlights off, and a tall man in dark clothes would begin unloading. Always something wrapped in white sheets. Always moving quickly, silently. At first he assumed it was just late-night transport of the deceased. Morbid maybe, but not illegal. Still, something didn't sit right. The man never used the front door, only the rear, slipping through shadows. Like he didn't want to be seen. The wrapped forms were too small, too irregular in shape to always be bodies. And once he saw movement beneath the fabric, a twitch, a shudder. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a gust of wind, but the dread grew deeper every night. One evening, curiosity pushed him to his window. He watched through binoculars as the man dragged a sheet-covered form into the backyard. Instead of bringing it inside, he knelt beside it and waited for nearly 10 minutes. Then, without warning, the sheet lifted on its own. A small, clawed hand emerged, reaching upward, before it was swiftly pushed back down. The man wrapped it tighter and carried it through a side entrance he'd never noticed before. That night, the observer didn't sleep. The next day, he walked the property's perimeter. The funeral home's outer walls were cracked and stained, but what caught his eye was the strange arrangement of stones in the backyard, small piles like makeshift graves, aligned in a crescent shape. He knelt to inspect one and found tiny, childlike footprints pressed into the soil nearby. But there were no children in the neighborhood, none that he'd ever seen, and certainly none small enough to leave prints that narrow. He went back inside and locked every door. A week later, the man next door appeared at his front door, smiling, calm, eyes too still. He introduced himself as Mr. Vance, the new director. Said he noticed him watching from time to time and offered a friendly warning. Some things are better left to the professionals. Then he handed over a business card, blank save for a small red symbol resembling a skeletal tree. The observer didn't respond, just watched the man turn and walk away with unnatural stillness. From that point on, the activity increased. He heard dragging sounds on pavement, shuffling behind the hedges, whispers near the air vents. One night, the smell of formaldehyde filled his bedroom, though no windows were open. He started recording the backyard with an old camcorder, hoping to capture something he could show others. But every morning the tapes were blank, static, even though the camera showed signs of being used. He began to wonder if whatever was happening next door was warping more than just time. One particularly stormy night, he saw Mr. Vance standing in the rain, unmoving for hours. Lightning would flash, and each time the man's expression changed slightly. A smile, a grimace, something in between. He was soaked, yet dry. Still, yet vibrating faintly, like a ripple in reality. At 3:33 a.m., he turned and walked toward the woods behind the funeral home, dragging a bundle behind him. The bundle left a faint red trail that the rain couldn't wash away. Compelled by fear and obsession, the observer followed the next morning. No sign of footsteps, no bundle. But the trees near the trail were marked, each one carved with the same red symbol from the business card. The ground was soft, disturbed. As he reached the center of the clearing, he stepped on something that cracked underfoot. He looked down to see bones, tiny, curved, not animal, something else. He ran home and vomited. That night he dreamed of a room beneath the funeral home, stone walls, flickering candles, and cages lining the floor. Inside each cage, pale figures with black eyes, clawed fingers, and mouths stitched shut. They watched him silently. Mr. Vance stood behind him, whispering in a language that made his teeth ache. When he awoke, he found a long scratch across his forearm and his shoes muddy. He hadn't left the house, he was sure of it. He went to the police with his suspicions. They were polite but unconvinced. No evidence, no missing persons, no signs. of illegal activity. He showed them the red mark on his arm. It had already faded. He begged them to investigate. They promised to look into it, but never returned. When he checked the property the next day, the graves were gone. The backyard perfectly clean, freshly raked, as if nothing had ever happened. He started losing time. Hours would vanish. He'd wake up in different clothes, find soil under his nails. The worst was waking up once in his bathtub, water ice cold, candles burned down to the wick, and a black feather tucked into his shirt pocket. His journal entries became erratic. Scribbled warnings, frantic diagrams of the funeral home's layout, and symbols he couldn't remember drawing. He was unraveling, and the man next door knew it. Eventually, he broke into the funeral home. He had to see for himself. Armed with a flashlight and recorder, he crept in through the back. The halls were silent. Too silent, no echoes, no smell, no temperature, just an unnatural stillness. He reached a locked door with a symbol burned into the wood. Inside, he heard breathing, slow, wet, not human. He backed away, but it was already too late. Something had hurt him. The next morning, his house was empty, furniture gone, windows broken from the inside. The neighbors claimed he'd moved in the middle of the night. But no moving trucks had been seen. No calls were made. The funeral home continued operating quietly. No one dared look too long. But sometimes at 2 a.m., a new neighbor hears dragging sounds and sees Mr. Vance waving from the shadows, welcoming, patient, waiting. He couldn't sleep after what he'd seen in the backyard of the funeral home. The piles, the stains, the unnatural silence, it all pointed to something monstrous. But it wasn't enough. He needed proof. So he waited, watched, took notes. One night, just after 2 a.m., he saw Mr. Vance dragging another bundle through the alley behind the building. But this time, instead of entering the woods, the man cut toward the old unused high school field nearby. The moonlight followed him like a spotlight. The observer followed, careful not to be seen. Mr. Vance stopped at the rusted metal bleachers behind the football field. With one hand, he moved a panel aside. Something hidden, something prepared. He shoved the bundle beneath it and stood in silence for a full minute, facing the woods as if listening. Then, just as silently, he returned to the funeral home. The owl. Man watching from the shadows waited, heart thundering in his chest. Once the coast was clear, he crept toward the bleachers. The cold metal groaned under his weight. The air felt wrong, charged, almost humming. Underneath, it smelled like copper and decay. He shone his flashlight inside and recoiled. Blood. Sheets. Shredded. Stained deep red. Strips of plastic curled in the mud, glinting under the light. And then he saw them. Small handprints in the dirt. Not footprints, handprints. Dozens. Toddler-sized, but with too many fingers. Some dragged, some clawed into the ground. Panic rose in his throat like bile. He backed away slowly, his boot crushing something soft. He didn't look. Couldn't. He returned home in silence, shaking, hands filthy with earth and blood. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He reviewed his footage over and over, but the camera had gone black the moment he reached the bleachers. Just like always, like the place itself refused to be captured. The next night he returned, the bleachers were clean, pristine, no blood, no prints. The panel sealed, as if it had never happened. But he had the smell in his nose, the weight in his chest. He knew it was real. Unsure of what to do, he contacted a local journalist anonymously, sent a detailed email with his findings, included pictures of the night sky, timestamps, a hand-drawn map. He waited days, no reply. When he checked the site again, the journalist's office was empty, shuttered. No record of anyone by that name at the publication. Another silence. Another vanishing. Another loose end tied off too neatly. The web was tighter than he realized. Soon after, he began receiving packages, unmarked, no return address. Inside the first, a single photograph of the bleachers taken decades ago, with Mr. Vance standing in the background, unaged, unchanged. In the second, a scrap of the same shredded sheet wrapped around a bone, small, childlike and burned at the tip. He wanted to run, to leave town, But he didn't. He stayed. He needed to see it through. Obsession had overtaken fear. The dreams intensified. He'd wake covered in dirt, fingertips stained red. In one dream, he crawled beneath the bleachers and found a pit, spiraling downward, carved with symbols, the air thick with weeping. At the bottom, a black door pulsed like a heart. Behind it, he heard the voices of children crying in reverse. He woke screaming, fingernails torn, the sheets tangled like vines. Outside, the wind carried faint laughter. One morning, he found footprints on his porch, muddy, small, leading up to his front door, then away. But nothing was stolen, nothing broken. Only a single word scratched into the wood with tiny claws. Soon. He moved the next day, but deep down he knew it wouldn't matter. The trail wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. He had followed the wrong secret too far, and now it followed him back. He tried to forget, blocked it out, changed his name, burned the notes. But the images returned in flashes, those tiny handprints, those bloodied sheets. And one night, while walking home, he passed by a construction site where old bleachers had been relocated. Without thinking, he looked beneath them. And there in the mud sat the same torn sheet, waiting, damp, familiar. He didn't go home that night. The funeral home, he later learned, had burned down in what authorities called an electrical fire. No bodies recovered, no remains identified. Just ash. Mr. Vance was never found. But sightings began popping up in nearby towns, strange dragging sounds near abandoned buildings, bleachers being vandalized, children claiming they'd seen the man with two long arms, watching from the shadows at recess. The story was spreading. The darkness was moving. Some say the bleachers weren't just hiding places. They were gateways, doors to something, older, something hungry. Whatever Mr. Vance served, it fed on small things, forgotten things, things people overlook. A cracked sidewalk, a rusted hinge, a child's whisper, and underneath it all, blood, always blood. Not a flood, but a drip, constant, careful, enough to keep the pact alive. The man, now older, hollow-eyed, worn, keeps moving from town to town. Every park he visits, he checks beneath the bleachers. Every schoolyard, every stadium. Not because he wants to find it again, but because he's afraid he will. And if he does, he knows what will be waiting. Not Mr. Vance, not a creature, but the faces of those who were never rescued. Watching, reaching, waiting for him to come home. Some stories end with resolution. Others linger like a cold breath on the back of your neck. These stories, the ones you've just witnessed, don't ask for closure. They are seeds planted in your mind, waiting to grow in silence. Maybe you'll brush them off. Maybe you'll tell yourself it was just fiction. But when the lights flicker or the hallway feels too quiet, you'll remember, and you'll wonder, what if it wasn't? There's something deeply human in our fear of the unknown. We search for patterns, logic, safety, but these encounters defy all of that. They press against the boundaries of what we call real, reminding us that we know far less than we like to believe. Whether it's a creature on a foggy road, a face in the window, or a hum beneath your dreams, it all points to the same truth. We are not alone, and we never were. Think of the people in these stories, ordinary lives interrupted by something impossible. None of them went looking for horror. It found them, quietly, patiently. It slipped in through the edges of their routines, crept into the stillness between moments, and waited for them to notice. And once they did, there was no going back. Because some things once seen refuse to be unseen, you might feel safe now, watching this from the comfort of your room, phone in hand, door locked. But every story here began with someone just like you, someone who thought it would never happen to them, and yet it did. Maybe it already has. Maybe the shadow in your hallway isn't just your coat. Maybe the dream you had last week wasn't just a dream. If these stories moved you, unsettled you, or made you question what's waiting in the dark, then you understand why they must be told. Share them, discuss them, shine a light into the places we fear most. Not to chase away the darkness, but to prove we're not facing it alone. Because silence is where these things thrive, and fear left unspoken becomes something else entirely. Subscribe if you dare to hear more. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next whisper from beyond. And if you've experienced something you can't explain, leave a comment below. Tell your story, because the moment you do, you'll realize that you're not the only one, you never were.